Okay, you're ready to go. Have a good session.
Great. Okay. Well, welcome everyone. I'm Giulio, and today I'm going to share this fantastic session with Peihan. And as we briefly discussed before, I'm going to introduce speakers and make sure that you don't go over time, and Peihan will handle questions and monitor the chat. So I suggest that we are going to do a 5-minute talk for each paper and take the questions right afterwards. So without further ado, the first talk of today is on universal proxy encryption, and Rio is going to give the talk. Rio, please.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the introduction and coming to my talk. I'm going to talk about universal proxy encryption. This is a joint work with Nico Dotlin. Okay, in this work, we put forward the notion of universal proxy encryption, which is a generalization of proxy encryption. We present two main constructions. One is universal proxy encryption scheme based on obfuscation. The other one is a relaxed version of universal proxy encryption based on garbled circuit. Okay, let's start with what is standard proxy encryption. Let's consider the following scenario. Alice sends an encrypted email to Bob. Bob is on vacation, so he wants to forward emails to Chris during his vacation. However, Chris cannot decrypt the encrypted email since Chris does not have Bob's decryption key, and Bob does not want to reveal his decryption key to Chris. So here's proxy encryption comes in. In proxy encryption, we have re-encryption key generation algorithm, which takes two different keys and generate a token called token or re-encryption key. And we also have a re-encryption algorithm, and this is given to a proxy. And this re-encryption algorithm takes a ciphertext of Alice, ciphertext to Bob, and also takes re-encryption key and generate re-encrypted ciphertext. This can be decrypted by Chris. Okay? So if this proxy runs a re-encryption algorithm, then forward the encrypted email to Chris, then Chris can decrypt the ciphertext. Okay. However, all existing PRE schemes are constructed from scratch. We cannot use existing PK schemes such as the L-gamma encryption, LAF encryption. And we can convert ciphertext between the same scheme. Okay? So our question is, can we convert a ciphertext of some scheme X into a ciphertext of scheme Y? For example, can we convert a ciphertext of L-gamma encryption into a ciphertext of LAF encryption? So this is our main question. Okay. So universal proxy encryption solves this problem. There are two different public key encryption schemes. One is by derivators scheme. The other one is derivative scheme. For example, we can use L-gamma encryption and LAF encryption. So these encryption schemes, each key generation algorithm output the key pair, and each encryption algorithm output the ciphertext. And universal proxy encryption consists of two algorithms. One is re-encryption key generation algorithm. This takes two keys of derogator and derivative and output the re-encryption key. And the other algorithm is re-encryption algorithm that takes derogator's ciphertext and re-encryption key, then output a ciphertext of derivative scheme. So this ciphertext is in the ciphertext of derivatives public key encryption scheme. So we can decrypt this de-encrypted ciphertext by using the decryption algorithm of delegated scheme. This is a universal proxy re-encryption. We can consider a relaxed version of a universal proxy re-encryption. Encryption key generation algorithm is the same as UPRE. However, re-encryption algorithm is a bit different. This algorithm output or ciphertext, but the encrypted ciphertext, but this might not be in the ciphertext of delegated scheme. So we need a modified decryption algorithm in relaxed UPR scheme, but we can use the original decryption key of delegated scheme. So we do not need to change the decryption key of the original decryption key, but we need a slightly modified decryption algorithm to decrypt re-encrypted ciphertext. So this universal proxy re-encryption has a new application of proxy re-encryption. We can use this for migration of encryption system. If quantum computers are available, RSA or the discrete log-based encryption will be broken. So we want to migrate from obsolete or vulnerable encryption to new one. We can delegate this re-encryption to some cloud. This cloud saves the tremendous amount of encrypted data. If a user wants to migrate from such as an RSA encryption system to RegF encryption system, then we can use universal proxy encryption, and the user just re-encryption key to the cloud. Then the cloud can re-encrypt the ciphertext instead of the user. Okay. So I'm running out of time, so I skip the construction overview. So our result is this is a summary of our result. We define the notion of universal proxy encryption, and we propose two constructions. One is based on obfuscation. The other one is a relaxed version of universal proxy encryption, but it is based on just standard assumption, the garbled sum. We only assumed one-way function. Okay. Thank you.
Any questions from the audience? I have a quick question. So in terms of definition, did you only define it in a unidirectional scenario, or you also have a definition for bidirectional UPRE?
Yeah, in our paper, we only define the unidirectional one, but we can define bidirectional one, and we achieve the unidirectional schemes. Yeah.
I see. Do you think bidirectional might be easier to construct, or there's a specific reason that should only define it for unidirectional?
I'm not sure about the universal proxy encryption case. In general, standard proxy encryption, it is easier to achieve bidirectional scheme, but I'm not sure it is easier to achieve in UPR case. Yeah.
Okay. Let's thank the speaker again.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a few more minutes. I think 1 more minute for question, but if there are none, maybe the next speaker can start sharing his screen. Good. Okay, so our next, sorry.
Sorry, yeah.
Go on.
Sorry, I was just about to ask if you can see the slides, but
yes,
yeah,
yes.
to you.
Good. Looks good, and I think I can hear you well as well. And yeah, so let's get right into it. Our next talk is going to be efficient, adaptively secure IB and CAMs and VRFs via near collision resistant. And David is going to give the talk. Please.
Yeah. Hello, everyone, and welcome, and thank you for the kind introduction, Julio. I will be presenting joint work with Tibor Jager and Rafael Kurek about constructing efficient, adaptively secure IBEs and VRFs from near collision-resistant hash functions. In terms of contributions, we introduce near collision resistance as a natural assumption for hash functions that allows to efficiently achieve adaptive security while avoiding the random oracle methodology. Furthermore, we present 4 efficient constructions that use the technique. First, a variant of Rotter's IBE with only logarithmically many group elements in the public key. And then we also show how the technique can be applied in the lattice context by presenting an IBE secure under LWE with only logarithmically many matrices in the public key. Furthermore, we also show that the IBChem by my 2 co-authors from Asia Crypt 2018 is also secure with a quadratically better loss. Finally, we also present a verifiable random function with only a logarithmic number of group elements in the public verification key and in the proofs of correctness. As a bonus, when I said logarithmic before, these numbers were only not asymptotically small, but also concretely. That is, for a security parameter of 128, this number is only 8 group elements or matrices depending on the construction, and of course, plus a small constant number of group elements or matrices for the specific construction. First, I'd like to informally introduce near collision resistance as an assumption. That is, when we assume that the family of hash functions is near collision resistant, that means that we assume that the birthday attack is the most efficient attack in finding collision also on subset of the output bits and not only on the complete output of the standard of the hash function. As for standard collision resistance, that is for a hash function with 16 output bits as depicted here, we assume that every algorithm that runs in time t has at most a chance of t squared over 2 to the 6 in finding collision on the first 6 output bits. However, for near collision resistance, we also assume that's for arbitrary subset of the output bits and not only for prefixes. Now let's look into how we can leverage this assumption to efficiently achieve adaptive security. For the idea, assume that we are in the reduction from some complexity assumption to the adaptive security of an IBE, and we know sufficiently good approximations of the adversary's runtime t and its advantage epsilon. We then leverage this knowledge to choose a subset I of output bits of the hash function such that first, the adversary cannot find a collision with probability better than epsilon over 2 in its runtime, and second, that the number of possibilities on these output bits is polynomial. The idea is then, in the reduction, to guess the hash of the challenge identity on the subset of output bits I. Since there are only polynomially many possibilities, our guess will be correct with a probability of at least 1 over some polynomial. Furthermore, since the adversary can only find a collision with probability of at most epsilon over 2 on the subset, it is also sufficiently unlikely to make a user secret key query that matches our guess. As you might have noticed, our goals for choosing the size of the set I are conflicting, meaning we want to choose I as small as possible to make the probability of guessing correctly as large as possible, while at the same time keeping the collision probability on the chosen position sufficiently small. Trading off these 2 goals thus leads to an ideal choice for the size of this index set I. Previous constructions, however, choose the set and its size suboptimally. More specifically, they choose I as a prefix of length the smallest power of 2 larger than the ideal size, by that choosing I almost twice the size of an ideal choice in the worst case. For example, if 5 were the ideal choice, previous constructions would choose a prefix of length 8. Our approach maintains the small key sizes while at the same time improving the tightness loss quadratically. That is, we cut the output of the hash function in blocks of exponentially growing lengths, meaning a first block h0 of 1 bit, then a second block h1 consisting of 2 bits, and so on and so forth. We then represent the ideal size of I as a sum of powers of 2 and choose I as a set of output bits in the respective blocks, meaning if 5 is the ideal choice, then we would choose the blocks h0 and h2, since together they make up 5 bits. Due to the time limitations, we won't be able to cover how exactly this is embedded in a construction and how it maintains the small key sizes, and we have to refer to the paper for a more thorough explanation. Summing up, we introduce near collision resistance as a mild hash function assumption that allows to efficiently replace the random oracle model for achieving adaptive security. Furthermore, we show how it can be used to construct IBEs from pairings and lattices and how it can be used to construct a VRF from pairings, and all of these very efficiently. Last but not least, thank you very much for your attention. And if you have any questions, feel free to look it up in our paper, or write us an email, or of course, ask right now. I'll also be available on Zulip throughout the conference. So if questions come up later on, feel free to write me a message, or also my co-authors. Thank you very much.
Any questions from the audience? Feel free to type your questions on the chat or just speak up. I have one quick question. So the notion of near collision resistance, is it new proposed in this paper, or it was in the literature?
Yes and no. So some of it is in the literature. For example, if you look into the book on applied cryptography from Menezes, sorry, I don't remember the second author's name, they already mentioned it, and also some in the context of security of hash functions. It also comes up sometimes for attacking hash functions, but in the specific notation that we use, it is new. It is an adaptation or more general formulation of truncation collision resistance that my two co-authors introduced in their AsiaCrypt 2018 paper.
So is the new flavor coming from the adaptive security part?
No, it's more about the tightness. So what I presented was guessing the prefix that originally goes back to the confined guessing techniques for signatures. And in the AsiaCrypt 2018 paper, it was then used in the context of IBEs and for hash functions, where they considered specifically prefixes of the hash function. And now choosing arbitrary subsets of the output bits allows us to achieve a better tightness. That's the rough history of that definition and its changes.
I see. Thanks. Any other questions?
Okay. So I have a quick question.
In
terms of actual instantiation of this hash function, do you need something with structure like group base, or any hash function like SHA-256 would work for you?
So for instantiation, we would most likely assume that modern hash functions have this property, since, for example, SHA-3 or Keshak are proven to be indifferentiability from a random oracle. However, in a slightly idealized model. Also, in the literature, near collision resistance is mentioned as a design goal for hash functions. However, if we look at complexity assumptions like discrete logarithm or similar assumptions, or also from the lattice context, at least we are not aware of any provably secure constructions that achieve this notion. Nonetheless, we deem it to be a plausible and to be a mild alternative compared to the random oracle model.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Any other questions?
Maybe I can ask a clarifying question. So what makes it kind of a good alternative to the random oracle model? The provable security, because what if you just use a collision resistant hash function? Is that not enough, I think, or is that too much? And
if you use a complete collision resistant hash function like SHA-3 with 256 output bits, then you would have to guess the complete hash function output, and you would probably be wrong with your guess in the reduction with a very high probability. What we also thought about was, for example, SHA-3 also has extendable output function modes, where you can also just use a prefix of the hash function or smaller versions of it. We thought about concatenating different length hash functions together and then using those. However, those do not seem to work due to the multi-collision attacks by Zhu from 2004. So because then you can more easily find collisions on the concatenation of hash functions than you would on single ones. So that was the closest that we could get to actually instantiating it from complete from standard collision resistance. Does that answer the question?
Yeah,
Thank the speaker again.
Okay, we are right on time. So if the speaker for the next paper can share his screen. Perfect. So the next talk is going to be about subversion resilient public key encryption with practical watchdogs. And Pascal is giving the talk.
Right, thank you very much. So hello and welcome to my talk on subversion resilient public key encryption with practical watchdogs. My name is Pascal Bemmann, and this is joint work together with Hongmao Chen and Tibor Jager. Right. So back in 2013, the Snowden revelations showed that state-level adversaries were able to influence and manipulate the implementation of widely used cryptographic schemes, which led to a whole series of scientific works showing how to model these kind of attacks and also coming up with possible countermeasures. One of these countermeasures are the so-called watchdogs, which are trusted parties that test subverted implementation. While there are different classes of watchdogs, in this work we will focus on offline watchdogs, which I will explain now. So there are two phases. In the first phase, the watchdog is aware of an honest specification of the cryptographic scheme, and it knows the input and output behavior. Then the adversary provides an implementation of the specification, which may deviate in any possible way. And the task of the watchdog is to compare the in and outputs of the specification and the implementation to see if they match. If they match, the watchdog accepts the implementation, and otherwise signals there's some backdoor possibly embedded. After the second phase, your usual security experiment, in our case the CPA security game, is executed. However, the twist is here that instead of your usual algorithms, you execute the security experiment with the implementation provided by the adversary. So what does then security mean in this model? In previous works, you have asymptotic definitions where you use some polynomial time watchdog, and you have that either this polynomial time watchdog has some non-negligible detection advantage, or you have your security guarantee like CPA security. We identified some potential problems with this kind of definition. For one, you don't have a specific runtime for the watchdog. So if you would, for instance, employ this in practice, then you wouldn't know for how exactly long you would need to run your watchdog. Further, a non-negligible detection advantage might just not be enough for some use cases. For example, consider an investigative journalist who has to fear that his identity or his sources might get leaked if he uses subverted means of communication. But while you could argue that you can use existing schemes and boost your detection advantage by simply re-executing a watchdog, this could induce a potentially huge testing overhead, especially if testing is done regularly, for instance, each and every time before you use your mobile phone. This is why in our work we propose a model, which is a refinement of the watchdog model proposed by Russell et al., where we have a concrete bounds watchdog runtime and also use concrete security definitions. Security in our model basically means that either we detect subversion with overwhelming of probability, or we have our wanted security guarantee. Within this model, we then show different constructions. As an important building block, we show how to build randomness generators based on the phenomenon extractor, which is in an extremely simple construction and can be tested in constant time. This gives rise to uniform random coins, and with that, we turn attention to building subversion resilient key encapsulation mechanism. And there we show that you can build subversion resilient chems based on chem combiners, based off the work of Pöttering et al., which is basically a trusted XOR function. And the idea here is that we execute many chems in parallel, and we gain security if at least one execution was honest, and the testing of the watchdog ensures that this happens with high probability. From this, it's not a large step to again efficiently testable CPA subversion resilient public key encryption, where we again use a trusted XOR function. However, there are some drawbacks and restrictions to our approach. First, we have bigger public keys in ciphertexts, and depending on the parameters, this could, for instance, mean that the number of public keys in ciphertext may be equal to the security parameter. In addition, we cannot handle stateful subversion, which means that subverted algorithms are not allowed to hold any state between executions. If this is something that worries you, potentially reverse firewalls might be a more fitting approach for that, depending on the application. So what are the key take-home messages from this talk? We propose a new model with concrete security based off the work of Russell et al. For the first time, we focused on minimizing the watchdog runtime. And within this model, we showed that the phonome extractor can be checked in constant time and gives us uniform randomness. Secure chems can be built via chem combiners based on the work of Pöttering et al. And last but not least, subversion resilient public key encryption, which can be tested efficiently, is possible and achievable. That's it from my side. If you have any questions, feel free to visit our paper, email me, or of course, ask questions now.
Any questions from the audience? I have one question. So for the secure chems via chem combiners, is it a generic construction?
Yes, so it works with any chem. And basically the only thing we need is a trusted XOR function. So it doesn't matter whether which chem you put in. There.
And is it also generic for the subversion resilient PKE?
Yeah, it's again, if we use basically our subversion resilient chem as a building block again in our PKE construction, so it's basically it doesn't matter which chem you put in there. So it's generic in that regard.
Okay. Any other questions?
Can I ask? So can you go maybe to the definition slide? So I was wondering what the role of the public key is in this algorithm. Is it just part of the adversary's algorithm?
Sorry?
Is there a public key for encrypting, or like where does the public key appear in your definition? I'm just curious about.
I mean, basically, so the adversary provides implementations of the keygen algorithm and the encrypt algorithm. And basically, all the watchdog does, it chooses random values, compares the outputs if these are generated honestly. And after that, the securities experiment is then executed, and you get your public key. So, but basically, our approach is we take our security definition and build the subversion part around it. That's basically the main idea.
Any other questions? Okay, let's thank the speaker again.
All right. So if the next speaker, oh, fantastic.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you well. Perfect. And I can also see the slides. All right, so our next talk is going to be about non-interactive CCA2 secure threshold crypto systems, achieving adaptive security in the standard model without pairings. And Julian is giving the talk. Take it.
Right, thank you. Thank you for the introduction. So let me first explain what was our goal. When writing this paper, we wanted to build non-interactive threshold public key encryption. The idea is the following. Instead of sampling one secret key, you share it into L key shares, which are then distributed to servers. And when you receive a ciphertext, as in a standard PKE, you instead forward the ciphertext to the servers, which will then all compute some partial decryption of this ciphertext. And when you receive these partial decryptions, of course, you want to check whether these decryptions are truthful or not. This is the partial verification algorithm. And when you have at least T out of L partial decryptions that are valid, that you can trust, then the combined algorithm lets you recover the message M. We want to achieve for this crypto system the best possible security, which is the CCA2 security under adaptive corruptions setting. So the idea is that you take the standard in CCA2 security game, but you have instead an oracle for partial decryptions for any server. You also ask the adversary for which threshold it wants to set at the beginning of the game. And you also allow the adversary to do the following two kinds of queries. So first, you have the corruption query where the adversary recovers any key share at any time. And also you allow the adversary to make partial decryption queries for the challenge. Of course, if it makes too many of these queries, it could trivially win, and we exclude this case. And our result is that under the DCR assumption and under the learning with errors assumption, it's possible to build such TPKE, whereas from previous works, it was only achieved using pairings. Moreover, we can see that our first construction is pretty efficient because in terms of ciphertext size, we only have about 3 times the size of the non-threshold version of the scheme. But the second construction is not that much efficient because we have a super polynomial modulus. This is a flow that is common to a lot of TPKE using the learning with errors assumption. Our main building block, which is common to both schemes that we build, is the linear secret scheme. The idea is to share a secret S among n persons, and when k of them are working together, they can compute some linear combination of their secret key shares to recover the secret S. This will be a way to share the secret key. So I briefly recall the hardness assumptions that we use. The first scheme uses the DCR assumption, the second scheme using the LWE assumption. And now to give you a brief intuition on how we do it, the first construction can either be seen as a pairing-free adaptation of a previous TPKE or as some thresholdized version of a Kamenisch-Shoup encryption schemes. The idea is to have ciphertexts of this form, where H is J0 to the secret key, which is then shared using a list. And we need to add a simulation sound proof that the first part of the ciphertext is indeed an F residue mod n squared to get the CCA2 security. To do so, we use a NISIC that we instantiate using correlation intractable hash functions, hence the need for the learning with errors assumption. And this we built from scratch. In the end, we get that the scheme is indeed CCA2 secure under the assumption that DCR indeed holds, and there is the NISIC we use is one-time simulation sound. One-time simulation sound meaning that if you see one simulated proof, then you still are unable to forge proofs for false statements. But this is a property which is satisfied by our new construction, so that's all right. Finally, to give you a quick insight on the second construction, it can be seen as a thresholdized version of dual regf, where we share the secret key R using the list. We share each coefficient of it, and everything then comes naturally until the parts with decryption, where we need to add some noise in order not to reveal the key shares. And this is where the super polynomial modulus comes from. And to get the CCA2 security, we also need a proof that ciphertexts are well formed. And to conclude, the open problem that we still have is that how is it possible actually to build a TPKE using only a polynomial modulus while still getting reasonable ciphertext size? So thank you for your attention. And if you have any question, I'll be happy to answer them.
Any questions from the audience? I have a question regarding the definition for the threshold decryption, where you have a verify algorithm, partial verify algorithm.
Yes.
I was wondering if that's necessary in the definition, or it has something to do with the CCA security.
So actually, it's independent from the CCA security. It's not used in the CCA security. There are other security definitions, notably a notion of robustness that are used, but I do not have time to treat it. And this is something that can be treated a bit apart, because what you can do is most of the time adding a proof that your partial decryptions is indeed trustful is enough to get the robustness.
Right. So if you don't have this algorithm or you don't need this robustness guarantee, can you achieve a more efficient, or this is quite generic and it doesn't add a lot of cost on top?
So what we actually do in the paper is we actually build the keygen, the encryption, the partial decryption, and combined algorithm first. And then we see that to get the partial verification to work, we need to add something to the key generation and to the partial decryption. So if you want to remove this verification thing, you can get slightly better things.
I see. Thanks. Any other questions?
Can you show us how you're sharing the secret key again in the LWE scheme?
Sorry, I didn't hear you.
Sorry, can you show us how you're sharing the secret key again in the LWE-based scheme?
All right, so we have this building block. We have this linear integer secret sharing. This is something which does not come from us, which lets us share an integer into key shares. And in the case of LWE, so your secret key will be some matrix, and you can actually share each coefficient of the matrix using this list.
I see. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, let's thank the speaker again.
Great. So we are perfectly on time. And if the next speaker wants to share his screen, we can proceed.
Yeah, hold on. Let me see if what's going on here. Oh, here we go. Got it.
You look very young, Adam.
Yeah, it's just last year. Okay, everyone can see my screen?
Yes, that looks good.
That looks good. Okay, so thanks for coming. This talk is about selective opening security for deterministic primitives. So if you studied or heard of selective opening security, deterministic primitives kind of give an interesting twist to this problem. So I'll start with the background and motivation. I'll move to define selective opening secure hash functions, and then selective opening secure deterministic encryption, and then conclude. So some motivation, just generally speaking, is as we advance in encryption schemes, so do new types of attacks. And one type of attack that people have looked at for a while now is break-ins, so like adaptive corruption to parties in a protocol, or breaking into a sender's machine and getting messages and maybe the random coins that they use to encrypt the message, things like this. So this isn't captured by standard IND-CPA security. And we need new models that capture such attacks. Some things one may consider is like the adversary may break into senders. So here we're talking specifically about encryption schemes, for example, right? And public key encryption schemes, and break into senders' machines. So they may get the messages and randomness that the sender used to encrypt. The question is, how can we protect the other messages? So can we give proof that like the messages of the other senders that weren't corrupted are secure? And theoretically, I mean, a theoretical result is that there exists a PKE that is IND-CPA, but vulnerable to these types of attacks, which are called selective opening attacks. So it actually is a genuine concern for you know, encryption schemes. Okay, so how do we go about protecting against this? So what we do is we use selective opening secure PKE to protect against the after effects of the break-in. So again, like I think an important point is that we're not protecting against the break-in itself. We're protecting against what security can be possible after the break-in, right? To a sender's machine. And in this work, we want to construct SOA secure deterministic primitives. So deterministic primitives are like that we consider our hash functions and deterministic encryption schemes. I think there's a couple of motivations for this. One is that for deterministic encryption schemes, they're also useful for protecting against bad randomness, meaning that deterministic encryption scheme, if the random coins have, if you use a deterministic encryption scheme to encrypt like message concatenated with coins, and your coins have not full entropy, the scheme is still secure. Whereas a standard IDCPA encryption scheme does not guarantee security if the randomness only has high entropy, for example. So that's why we want to look at deterministic encryption. And for hash functions, I think a nice application is like password hashing. So imagine there's a password file of hashes of passwords, and some of the passwords gets corrupted, right? So you figure out, okay, this guy's password is this, so I know that this hashes to this. What can you say about the security of the other passwords? Okay, so what's been done in prior work is Bellari et al. And a paper by Hofheinz, which should be referenced here, show IND and SIM security notions for SO stands for selective opening for randomized PKE. And a paper by Bellari et al. In 2015 showed that there's no deterministic PKE scheme meeting SOA security under a simulation-based notion. So a simulation-based notion for deterministic encryption and hash functions is ruled out. Like deterministic primitives can't achieve a simulation-based SOA notion. So we use a formulation of Hong et al. From a few years ago for SOA for DPKE. And they leave constructions in the standard model open. So that's where our work basically started. And we give constructions not just for deterministic encryption in the standard model, but the simpler case of hash functions. Okay. How am I doing on time?
Well, we have banked a few minutes from before, so.
Okay, so I'll keep going. Okay, good. Yeah. So just let me know if I'm like ready. How do we define? So I said that a simulation-based notion of security is inachievable. So it's actually so they left the paper of Bellari et al. Left an open problem of giving a different definition, and it's instructive to see what that definition turns out to be. So let M sample vectors of messages, okay? And we're going to consider what's called mu D entropic message samplers, which means that any message has min entropy at least mu conditioned on any D other messages. And we're going to use the notion of conditionally resamplable, meaning that if you condition, so when you condition on those D messages, you can also resample the message condition on those D messages, right? So if you condition on some messages, you can resample the others, basically. So here's the security notion. So basically, the challenger generates a PK and SK and a bunch of messages according to M, and encrypts the messages, sends the ciphertext and the PK to the adversary. The adversary specifies a subset, and the challenger replies with that subset of messages. Now the adversary outputs some like guess G, and here's like the technical thing. So how do DE is SOA CPA secure if G is equal to F of the messages with about the same probability as the messages resampled conditioned on the open messages. So that's kind of the magic of this definition. Is it considers this resamplability. Okay, and this is, as I said, Huang et al. Showed that this notion is achievable in the non-programmable random oracle model, and we'll show it's achievable in the standard model. So anyway, the main results are, for the simpler case, so the hash functions are like deterministic encryption with no decryption, right? So it's kind of simpler. So in the simpler case, we get this result: 2 TY's independent hash functions are SOA secure for an unbounded number of T correlated messages, meaning any group of up to T messages can be arbitrarily correlated. Okay. An analogous result we get for deterministic encryption. And then one thing I won't maybe talk about in the talk, but I think is actually pretty interesting, is that we look at selective opening secure of just plain RSA and show that it holds under phi hiding. And this gives a proof of the one more RSA assumption under phi hiding. And the one more RSA assumption is used, for example, in Chalmers blind signature scheme. Our result just requires large E, so that's kind of the caveat. Okay, so lossy trapdoor function. So I'll go through just briefly, very briefly, the constructions and then conclude.
Hey, Adam, just to give you a check on times, maybe like 1-2 minutes, we should conclude.
Okay, so let's see. So maybe we have the main construction of deterministic encryption meeting our notion is from lossy trapdoor functions, and the construction it kind of does it uses a pairwise independent hash, and I don't know, probably you can't see it here, but you can talk to me after the talk if you want the details. But it uses a pairwise independent hash and kind of folds things inside a lossy trapdoor function. The lossiness really helps for selective opening security. That's how we get lossiness of RSA, as I said. And so I'll skip the proof, and thanks for your attention.
Any questions from the audience?
So I didn't realize that I had a little more time. I could have gone over maybe some of the results. So if you want me to go over anything, just let me know.
Yeah, sure. Can you go over the high level ideas for the construction, maybe?
Yeah. So so the main construction is this deterministic encryption construction. And so let's go through it. So the keygen generates a key pair for the lossy trapdoor function, and encryption hashes the message. You can think of H and G as random oracles at first, but then we can show that like pairwise independence suffices. So G of R is kind of the simulated coins. It's the hash of the message, and G of R XORs with the message to kind of blind the message. And then you fold Y and R inside the lossy trapdoor function. So it's kind of some type of random oracle based encryption scheme adapted to lossy trapdoor functions, where things are, as I said, you can think of at first cut, you can think of H and G as random oracles. But it turns out that it suffices that for them to be pairwise independent.
So here you did 2 hashes, first hash M, and then use that to somehow mask the message.
Yeah.
Is there a specific reason for that?
It's kind of like we took a specific randomized scheme and de-randomized it by hashing the message to get the coins. So that's where the first hash comes from. But then the actual scheme itself uses a hash, so that you get a second hash from that.
I see.
Yeah. And then the proof intuition is basically when you switch to the lossy mode, the whole lossy mode is pairwise independent. And then you can use the result saying that basically, I mean, this is basically our hash result saying that now a pairwise independent hash is SOA, right? Once you switch to lossy mode, you get effectively you get a pairwise independent hash and you apply that other result. So, okay.
Can I ask a
Okay.
question?
Any other question?
Yeah. So your construction, it looks, I mean, it's not the same, but it looks a little bit like OAP with using hash functions.
Yeah.
So could you get like both properties, like depending on whether you want the SOA, the selective opening security or the CCA2 security? Could you have a construction that uses both, or is there even a CCA variant of SOA?
Yeah, that's a great question. We didn't think about this kind of like hedge type of thing where, or whatever you call it, where you get two, like it's kind of interesting to have two notions of security depending on whether you're assuming random oracle or not, I guess. Or maybe if you assume, I guess if you assume random oracle here, of course you get the SOA security because the random oracle is pairwise independent. But if you just want to assume pairwise independence for SOA and then maybe get CCA from random oracle, yeah, I mean, that seems maybe plausible. We didn't prove that, but that's interesting. Thanks for the comment.
Sample speaker again.
Okay, so as for our last speaker of today, I think it's again David.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah, can hear you.
And I guess you
can see your slide.
Perfect, thank you. Yeah, thank you again for your kind introduction, Julio. And in this talk, I will speak about the tightness of verifiable random functions, or short VRFs. Intuitively, we can think of a VRF as a combination of pseudo-random functions and digital signatures. Syntactically, a VRF consists of three algorithms. First, a generation algorithm that produces a pair of secret key and public verification key. Then an evaluation algorithm that produces a VRF output Y for an input X. And just like PRF, the algorithm requires a secret key and the output is supposed to be pseudo-random. However, the evaluation algorithm also produces the non-interactive proof of correctness pi. This proof can then be used to verify the correctness of Y with respect to the input X and the public verification key. Due to the short time, we won't be able to discuss the security experiment for VRFs, but for intuition, you can mostly think of it as a security experiment for EU-FCMA security of unique signatures. In terms of contributions, this paper revisits the lower bounds on the loss of security proofs for public key cryptography from Eurocrypt 2016 by Bader et al. And extends them to VRFs. Furthermore, we present the first construction of a VRF that can be proven secure with this optimal security loss. This construction is based on one of the VRFs from the full version of the Crypto 2017 paper by Shota Yamada. Let us first look at the lower bounds for the tightness loss of security proofs of VRFs. Intuitively, VRFs are very similar to unique signatures, but with partially pseudo-random signatures, and we would thus expect that the security reduction for VRFs have a similar or larger reduction loss. Indeed, what we find is slightly surprising, namely that the current bounds only apply to VRFs that have a re-randomizable proof of correctness. However, we are able to address this in the proof of the lower bound of Bader et al. And thus adapt it to VRFs. We thus show that every reduction from a non-interactive complexity assumption to the security of a VRF loses at least a factor of Q, where Q is the number of queries by the adversary. We won't be able to go into the details of the proof. However, for those of you who know the techniques, the lower bound proof uses the re-randomizability only for the challenge. However, the challenge in the VRF security experiment does not include the proof of correctness pi, and thus the lower bound holds regardless of the re-randomizability of pi. Unfortunately, the loss of previous constructions in the standard model is significantly worse than what is indicated by our bound. However, with a little bit of trying, we can construct a VRF with a security proof with this tightness loss. For the intuition behind our technique, let us slightly move the goalposts and assume a very nice adversary that chooses all its queries and its challenge uniformly at random from the domain of the VRF. If this were the case, the reduction could just guess the first log Q+1 bits of the challenge input and the reduction would be able to extract a solution to the underlying hardness assumption if the first block Q plus 1 bits of the challenge do match the guess, and it can simulate an evaluation of the VRF if the first block Q plus 1 bits of an evaluation query differ from the guess. Then proving that this strategy yields a loss of only 8Q is rather straightforward, and we refer to the paper for the formal proof. However, of course, it only holds for this very nice adversary, and let's be honest, most adversaries won't be that nice. But we can make it work by passing all inputs through PRF first, before comparing them to the guess prefix. Then even if they are adversarially chosen, they will be distributed computationally indistinguishable from independent uniformly random values. However, the evaluation has to happen outside of the view of the adversary, and at the same time has to be incorporated into the proof of correctness. Fortunately, however, one of Shota Yamada's VRFs from Crypto 2017 allows us to do exactly that. More specifically, it allows us to embed an arbitrary NAND circuit of polynomial size and logarithmic depth into the VRF such that the reduction can simulate an evaluation of the VRF if and only if the circuit evaluates to 0, that it can extract a solution to the underlying hardness assumption if and only if the circuit evaluates to 1 on the challenge input. This embedding hides some chosen input bits and also all internal states and the output of the circuit from the adversary. Thus, we can embed the evaluation of the PRF and the comparison to our guess by setting the PRF key and the guess as secret input bits. Then the proof strategy we discussed before works without any flaws. In conclusion, we first showed that the lower bound on the loss of many public key primitives by Varda et al. From Eurocrypt 2016 also applies to VRFs in the standard model, and we then showed that this bound is tied by presenting VRF with an accompanying proof of security that achieves this optimal loss with up to a small constant factor. Finally, again, thank you all for your attention. If you have any questions, feel free to write an email, take a look at the paper, or of course, ask just right now or via Zulip later on. Yeah, thank you.
Thank the speaker for the talk. Any questions from the audience? So you said the lower bound and upper bound is only constant factors difference?
Yes. So we can prove the lower bound that with a loss of Q, where Q is the number of evaluation queries, and we can show that in the reduction that we lose only a factor of 8Q, where the 8 is due to some upper and lower bounding of some equations. So if you look at it very, very, very precisely, you might even get closer, but for the purpose of the paper, we deemed it plausible or enough to show this constant factor difference.
So asymptotically, it is tight.
Yes.
Any other questions? Okay, let's thank the speaker again and thank all the speakers for the session.
Yeah, thanks everyone for attending.
So we will be back in 15